On a frozen morning in the Montana highlands, veteran Ethan Ward thought it was just another quiet survey trip with his German shepherd, Rex. But when the dog stopped near a melting glacier and began barking furiously at the ice, everything changed. Beneath the glassy surface, trapped for 40 years, was a military truck marked U.S. Government, 1982. Inside it, bones, sealed crates, and a secret buried under decades of silence. What started as a simple discovery would uncover one of the darkest environmental crimes in American history, and test how far one man and his loyal dog would go for the truth. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments, and let's see how far this story of courage and redemption travels. Montana never knew gentle seasons. Spring arrived here not as a rebirth, but as a slow surrender. The ice retreating from the claws of winter, the mountains breathing mist like old ghosts waking from long sleep. The valley of Blackstone lay still under a bruised sky, its ridges etched with snow that glowed blue in the morning cold. Wind scraped through the pine trees like a rasp over bone, carrying the smell of wet rock and thawing moss. Somewhere between those silent walls, a man and a dog moved against the vast emptiness, two small figures dwarfed by God's frozen cathedral. Ethan Ward was 47 and had the look of someone carved out of the same stone he walked upon, angular jaw dusted with gray stubble, sun-cut lines spreading from his eyes like cracks in old glass. He wore a faded army jacket, whose elbows had frayed into honesty, and boots that still carried desert dust from years before. Once, he had been an Air Force mechanic, the kind of man who could coax life out of machines in storms that killed lesser men. But war had a way of taking more than orders could measure. His wife in a roadside crash during his third deployment, his faith somewhere between the letters that went unanswered. Now he worked for the state's volunteer rescue service, charting water sources and avalanche zones. It kept his hands busy and his mind half quiet. His only partner was Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd trained for search and rescue. The dog was a striking creature. Broad-shouldered, black and gold coat thick as mountain fir, a pale scar tracing his muzzle from a barbed wire rescue years ago. His amber eyes held the alertness of a soldier and the mercy of something purer. Locals joked that Rex understood human grief better than most priests. Ethan didn't argue. He owed the dog his life from an avalanche 2 winters back, and debts like that built a silence words couldn't break. That morning they hiked deeper into Blackstone Gorge, following the creek that still slept under plates of melting ice. The air shimmered with sunlight slicing through cold mist. Drops fell from the cliffs in slow, rhythmic beats, like the Earth's own pulse returning after hibernation. Ethan crouched beside the stream, filled a sample bottle, and tested it with the portable meter strapped to his glove. "Still acidic," he muttered. "Same runoff every year." Rex stood a few yards away, ears pricked, sniffing at something carried by the wind. A low growl rolled in his throat, a sound Ethan had learned never to ignore. "What is it, boy?" he asked, rising, his breath ghosting in the chill. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then bounded toward a jagged cleft in the glacier wall where sunlight struck a patch of transparent blue. Ethan followed, crunching over half-melted snow until the ice before him gleamed like glass. Behind that frozen pane was something unnatural, a glint of dull metal, curved and dark, the shape of a fender buried in centuries of frost. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared, heartbeat hammering against the silence. The wind died. Only the drip of water echoed between the canyon walls. He brushed away loose snow with his gloved hand, the touch revealing more metal beneath. Rivet lines, chipped paint, and finally the faint outline of a number plate almost erased by time. He leaned close, scraping frost with the edge of his knife until letters surfaced like ghosts from another age. U.S. Gov. 1982. A truck. Military issue. His stomach tightened. He'd seen dozens like it during his years stationed near the Arctic. Trucks used for chemical transport, sealed, unmarked, always guarded. "What the hell are you doing here?" he whispered to the ice. Rex whined, pawing the ground. Ethan stepped back, scanning the terrain. No tire marks, no debris, only a long depression in the glacier above, as if something had slid down decades ago and been swallowed whole. He took a photograph with his phone, zooming in on the plate, then another of the entire formation. The date stamped across the bottom screen glared like a warning. April 12th. Spring thaw. The perfect time for buried sins to surface. As he stood there, a cold draft curled around him, carrying a smell that didn't belong to mountain air, an acrid tang, faint but familiar, like metal soaked in fuel. His memories stirred. The Arctic base in 88, the convoy orders stamped hazardous, the night one of the trucks vanished into whiteout, and no one filed a report. He had been younger then, obedient, still believing that government meant guardianship. Now the sight of that half-buried machine made him feel something between dread and recognition, as though a forgotten confession had just found its priest. "Come on, Rex," he said finally, voice rough. "We'll mark the coordinates. Tomorrow we dig." The dog circled the spot once more before returning to his side, tail low, uneasy. Together they began the descent back toward the valley, their shadows long across the snow. Behind them, the glacier creaked, a deep, mournful groan that sounded almost alive. Ethan paused to listen. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard another sound beneath it, something like a hollow thud echoing from within the ice, distant yet deliberate, as if the mountain itself remembered what it had been forced to hide. He turned away, uneasy, and whispered to the dog, "Whatever's down there, it's been waiting a long time." The wind rose again, sweeping snow in thin veils across the gorge. The truck's rusted curve vanished under the glittering crust as if erasing its own discovery, but the smell of fuel lingered in the air, sharp, undeniable, like truth breaking through frost. Ethan looked back one last time, unaware that beneath that frozen silence, secrets older than his own grief were beginning to thaw. The apron lay hushed except for the hiss of snow and the low growl rumbling from Ranger's chest. Olivia kept her stance firm as more airport security arrived, their reflective jackets flickering in the floodlights. The first to step forward was Ethan Harris, a Transportation Security Administration officer in his early 40s. Tall and lanky, with shoulders that sloped forward as if weighed down by years of rigid regulations, he had a narrow face marked by deep worry lines. A neatly kept mustache decorated his upper lip, a feature often teased by colleagues but worn with quiet pride. His gray eyes darted quickly, always calculating, and though his demeanor was polite with passengers, he carried an intensity born from a near-disastrous incident early in his career when he had once missed a suspicious bag. That memory shaped his life. He trusted procedures more than instincts, and he clung to rules the way sailors cling to ropes in storm. "Barnes," Harris said, pulling his radio to his mouth. "Ops confirms pushback is frozen. We've got authorization to open the hold." Olivia nodded, her breath a plume in the cold. Ranger growled louder, nose fixed on the shadows inside the cargo bin. His body was taut, hackles raised, ears pinned forward like twin arrows. She gave the leash a slight tug. "Stay with me, partner." Another figure joined them. Jack Moreno, head of airport security for the night shift. In his early 50s, Jack had the build of a boxer gone slightly soft, with thick arms still knotted by muscle and a square jaw carpeted by 3 days of stubble. His dark hair was peppered with gray at the temples, and his deep-set brown eyes looked tired but alert. Jack was a man of blunt words and quick decisions, shaped by 2 decades as a Denver police officer before retiring early after a line-of-duty shooting had left him scarred. Not physically, but with a weight he carried silently. Among his colleagues, he was respected for his fairness and for never hiding behind a desk when something dangerous needed confronting. Jack gave a short nod to Olivia. "Your dog's onto something real. Let's move slow." 2 ramp workers disengaged the safety lock and swung the cargo hatch wider. Cold air rushed out, and the beam from Olivia's shoulder lamp cut deeper into the shadows. At first there was nothing but stacked bins, scattered luggage, and the metallic glint of container straps. Then movement, small, hesitant, betraying a human shape pressed low between crates. Ranger erupted into a bark so sharp it made Caleb Ortega, still standing near the tug, stumble back. Olivia's eyes narrowed, her lamp fixing on the figure. "Step out now," she commanded, voice clear and steady. "Hands where I can see them." The figure stirred, then slowly unfolded itself. A man, thin to the point of gauntness, crawled forward on hands and knees before lifting himself unsteadily into the light. He was about 45, though his face looked older, weathered by hunger and fatigue. His cheekbones jutted sharply, skin pale with a sickly gray tone. Black stubble clung unevenly to his jawline, and his dark eyes darted nervously, wide with the cornered look of a fugitive. His hair, once thick, was now unkempt and greased flat against his head. A thin jacket clung to his bony frame, inadequate against the freezing cold. Sweat glistened at his brow despite the biting air, betraying fear more than exertion. "My name's Victor. Victor Hale," he stammered, his voice raw and uneven. He raised trembling hands into the light, his words tumbling out. "I'm not dangerous, I swear, I just needed a way out." Jack Moreno stepped closer, his tone hard but controlled. "A way out of what?" Victor's eyes flicked to Ranger, who growled again, teeth bared in a warning that froze him in place. "Debt," Victor whispered finally, his voice cracking. "I'm running from people I owe. They'll kill me. I thought if I could just hide on a flight I'd be safe. Please, I'm not trying to hurt anyone." Olivia studied him carefully, every detail, the twitch of his shoulders, the sheen of sweat on his temple, the restless dart of his gaze. Something in his posture was wrong. People hiding from debt looked desperate, yes, but not this terrified. Ranger's nose pressed forward, sniffing the air around Victor as though peeling away his excuses. "Who are you in debt to?" Olivia asked, her voice calm but probing. Victor hesitated, his jaw clenching, eyes sliding away. "Just wrong people," he muttered. Jack's tone sharpened. "That's not an answer. Names, Hale." But Victor shook his head violently. "If I say their names, I'm dead. You don't understand. I shouldn't have even said this much." Ranger barked again, a deep warning bark, his eyes locked on Victor's chest, nose twitching with every shallow breath the man drew. Olivia trusted that signal more than the man's words. Her instincts agreed. Something about Victor's story didn't add up. "Search him," Olivia ordered. Harris stepped forward, patting Victor down with professional thoroughness. Out of his jacket pocket came a folded wad of cash, damp with sweat, and a small pocket knife with a broken tip. No weapons beyond that. Yet Victor trembled as though he carried a greater weight than any knife could bear. As Harris handed Olivia the items, she asked quietly, "Why risk freezing to death in a cargo hold for this?" Victor's answer was halting. "Because if I stayed out there, they'd find me. At least in here I had a chance. Just a chance." His thin frame sagged, as if the admission drained the last of his energy. Snow swirled harder outside, and the apron lights cast long shadows. Olivia glanced at Jack, whose dark eyes studied Victor with the kind of gaze that could cut lies apart. "He's hiding something," Jack said bluntly. "Your dog knows it too." Olivia nodded slightly, tightening her grip on Ranger's leash. "Then we dig deeper." And as Victor Hale stood trembling under the weight of eyes, floodlights, and the unrelenting gaze of a German shepherd, the night shifted. What had begun as a routine patrol was now a doorway into something larger, darker, and far from the simple story of a man fleeing debt. Snow drifted down in thin gray veils as Ethan Ward stepped out of the sheriff's office, his jaw tight, his boots crunching on the half-frozen street. Sheriff Hargreaves' words still echoed in his head. "Let it rest, Ward. Government business." Spoken with the kind of hollow calm that smelled of fear. Ethan knew that tone. He had heard it before from officers who'd seen too much and learned to stay quiet. The wind came slicing through Bear Ridge, carrying the metallic scent of ice and exhaust. He turned his collar up and headed for the only place where men still whispered what they weren't supposed to say. The Copper Lantern, a tavern leaning against the edge of Main Street like an old soldier too tired to stand straight. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the murmur of worn-out lives. The wood floor creaked beneath heavy boots, and the walls were crowded with old photographs of miners and veterans who had built the town and drunk themselves hollow in it. Ethan took a stool at the bar, set his gloves down, and ordered black coffee. Rex lay at his boots, head resting on his paws but eyes sharp, every inch of muscle alert beneath his dark coat. Behind the counter stood Marlene Keats, a woman in her late 40s with auburn hair pinned loosely and sleeves rolled to reveal strong, freckled arms. Her face carried both laughter lines and battle scars of small-town life. "You look like someone told you to mind your own business," she said, pouring him a refill with a voice roughened by years of smoke and sarcasm. Ethan gave a faint smile. "That obvious?" "Sheriff Hargreaves still pretending ghosts don't exist?" she asked, wiping the counter. "He told me to forget it," Ethan replied. "And you won't," she guessed, eyes narrowing with knowing amusement. "No," Ethan said quietly. "I can't." The door creaked open, spilling a draft of snow and a man who looked as if he'd stepped out of a memory. He was tall but stooped, wrapped in a heavy gray coat a decade too old, his thin white hair flattened under a wool cap. His skin was the color of parchment, etched deep with age and regret. Joseph Lark moved slowly toward the bar, limping slightly, his breath shallow and uneven. Marlene greeted him softly. "Afternoon, Joe. The usual?" He nodded without a word, took a stool 2 seats down from Ethan, and wrapped his trembling hands around a glass of whiskey. For a moment, the only sounds were the hum of the jukebox and the wind scraping against the windows. Then Joseph spoke, voice low and rough like gravel. "You've been up to Blackstone, haven't you?" Ethan turned, startled. "You know that place?" The old man gave a tired laugh. "Know it? I worked it. Drove for Northern Petrocorp, back when it was still wearing its first mask." His eyes flicked to Ethan's gloves, still dusted with traces of glacier mud. "They sent us up there in '82, said it was safe, non-toxic containment. That's what they called it. But we were burying poison, barrels marked with skulls. They told us to seal the crevasses and forget the coordinates." His voice dropped to a whisper. "One of the trucks never came back. The driver's name was Pierce. Good man. He tried to warn people." Ethan felt his pulse throb in his neck. "He died in that truck," he said quietly, still sitting behind the wheel. Joseph closed his eyes. Then he found his peace, finally. The rest of us just kept breathing the guilt. Marlene's hand paused mid-polish on a glass, her eyes darting between them. "Joe," she said softly, "you sure you want to dig this up? People who talk about Petrocorp don't last long." The old man smiled without humor. "At my age, honey, death's more polite company than silence." He leaned closer to Ethan. "Listen, son. Petrocorp's gone by another name now, but their rot's still here. You start pulling at that thread, it won't stop till everything unravels. Files are in Helena, State Archive basement, locked under federal code. That's where you'll find proof." Ethan studied him, seeing not just an old drunk, but a man haunted by his own complicity. "Why tell me?" he asked. Joseph looked up, his pale blue eyes clear for the first time. "Because you're the kind who doesn't know how to walk away." The tavern went silent for a beat, even the jukebox skipping to static as if the building itself was listening. Marlene poured the rest of Joseph's drink and pushed it toward him without charge. "For the road," she muttered. Joseph nodded in thanks, hands shaking as he lifted it. Ethan finished his coffee, laid money on the counter, and stood. "Appreciate the honesty," he said quietly. Joseph's lips twitched into a half smile. "Honesty's all I got left." When Ethan stepped back into the street, the storm had thickened. Snow whirled in soft spirals, muffling the sound of the world. Rex padded beside him, tail low, eyes scanning the shadows. The warm glow of the copper lantern faded behind them until it was just another ghost light swallowed by the white. Ethan looked toward the dark line of mountains, where the glacier slept under its shroud of silence. "We're going back," he murmured to Rex. The dog barked once, sharp and certain. Together they vanished into the snow, leaving only footprints that the wind quickly erased. The drive to the Holloway cabin took Ethan 2 hours through roads that seemed to narrow with every mile. The pines grew taller, thicker, their branches heavy with melting snow, bending low as if listening. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world so silent that the crunch of his tires on the gravel sounded almost like an intrusion. He parked near a gate that hung crooked on one hinge. A hand-painted sign read, "No visitors, no stories, no exceptions." The path beyond was half buried in snow, leading to a small log cabin pressed against the shoulder of the woods. Smoke curled weakly from its chimney, and a pair of old wind chimes clinked without rhythm. Rex leapt from the truck, nose twitching, tail lowered. Ethan knocked twice before hearing the slow shuffle of feet from inside. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman's wary eyes behind thick glasses. Grace Holloway, once a journalist whose name appeared in every major environmental expose, now looked like someone the world had forgotten. She was in her late 60s, tall but stooped, with silver hair tied back in a rough braid, her face creased and pale, the color of faded paper. A cigarette dangled from her lips, unlit. "If you're selling salvation, I've already got some," she rasped. "If you're from Petrocorp, I've got a gun." Ethan raised his hand slightly. "Neither. Name's Ethan Ward. I was told you might know something about the Petrocorp waste cases." Her eyes flickered at the name, a ghost of recognition passing through. After a pause, she opened the door wider. "Bring the dog. He looks cleaner than most people I've talked to." Inside, the cabin smelled of dust, pine, and old ink. Stacks of yellowed newspapers and file boxes leaned against the walls like fragile towers. A battered typewriter sat under a lamp whose shade was held together with tape. Grace moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured, as if time itself had taught her to distrust haste. She motioned toward an armchair patched with duct tape. "Sit. Coffee's old, but it's honest." As she poured, Ethan explained what he'd found in the Glacier. The truck, the corpse, the classified documents. Grace listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, her fingers idly tracing the chipped rim of her mug. When he mentioned the name Northern Petrocorp, she exhaled sharply and leaned back. "I spent 20 years chasing their ghosts," she said, voice low. "Wrote 3 exposés, lost 2 jobs, and had my house broken into twice. Petrocorp didn't just dump chemicals, son. They buried evidence, entire communities. When the lawsuits came, they bought the courts." Her tone hardened, but her eyes looked somewhere far away, as if watching old headlines burn. "We found traces of synthetic biotoxin research, Project Emberfall, they called it. Supposedly a defensive biological agent, but the byproducts contaminated 3 rivers and killed off half the trout. Population from here to Flathead." Ethan frowned. "Biotoxin? That matches the seal on the files I found." Grace nodded slowly, reaching for a metal filing drawer beside her chair. It screeched open to reveal bundles of aged folders, labeled in neat block letters. She pulled one free and laid it on the table. A faded manila envelope stamped "Confiscated Federal Hold, 1982. "This," she said, "is a copy I made before they raided my office. Took me a year to get it back through a friend at the Tribune. It's not the full file, but it's enough." She unfolded a brittle map, traced with red ink roots leading into the Blackstone Range. "These lines mark chemical transports. The last route, see that ridge? Matches exactly where you found your truck." Ethan leaned closer, the hair on his neck rising. "So it's real." Grace gave a grim laugh. "Oh, it's real. Too real for comfort. Every whistleblower vanished, every document sealed. When I tried to publish the 4th piece, the editor pulled it 2 hours before print. Next morning, my sources were gone. Some said they'd moved. Others said they never existed." She looked directly at Ethan. "You've stumbled into the graveyard of secrets, Mr. Ward, and you're not the first to dig there." Rex shifted uneasily, nose twitching toward the door. Grace noticed. "He's got good instincts," she said quietly. "They'll save you before the law ever will." She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. "Interviews. Recorded with a Petrocorp supervisor before he disappeared in '84. He talks about the biosamples, whatever they were transporting." She pushed it across the table. "If you've really got evidence, you can finish what I couldn't. But don't make the mistake of thinking the truth is safe. Once you speak it, you can't bury it again." Ethan took the tape and the map, tucking them into his jacket. "Why help me?" he asked quietly. Grace stared at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Because once, a long time ago, someone helped me. And I still believe this country deserves at least one man who won't sell the truth." Her voice softened. "Don't let them bury it again, Ethan." Outside, the forest had grown darker, branches shifting under the weight of wind. Ethan climbed into his truck, Rex jumping in beside him, the map spread across his lap. The roots converged at one word written in faded ink: Ashgrove Depot. He looked toward the mountains rising like cold sentinels beyond the trees. The road to Ashgrove would be treacherous this time of year, but his mind was made up. He started the engine, headlights slicing through the dusk, and drove toward the ridge where truth had been frozen for 40 years. The wind returned that night, moaning through the trees like a wounded thing. Ethan Ward sat by the wood stove in his cabin, the orange light flickering across the walls, throwing restless shadows over the maps and folders spread across his table. Rex lay near the door, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, ears twitching even in sleep. Outside, the forest of Bear Ridge was a black ocean of whispers, the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that watched. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Grace's words still played in his mind. Don't let them bury it again. He'd traced her map twice over, memorizing every ridge and frozen pass. Tomorrow, he would head toward Ashgrove Depot, but for now, he needed rest. It was just past midnight when Rex's low growl cut through the quiet. The sound wasn't a bark, just a warning, deep and guttural. Ethan froze, listening. Then it came again, the faint crunch of snow outside the window, slow and deliberate. He rose quietly, took the revolver from the shelf, and stepped to the door. "Stay," he whispered to Rex, but the dog ignored him, already on his feet, hackles raised, amber eyes fixed on the dark beyond the glass. Ethan opened the door and stepped into the freezing air. The moon hung half-hidden behind clouds, painting the snow in dull silver. The forest smelled wrong, metallic, burnt, and human. He circled the cabin slowly, boots sinking into the soft crust of new snow. That's when he saw them. Footprints, not his own, circling the cabin twice before vanishing into the tree line. They were large, the tread military grade, and fresh, hours old at most. Near the porch, something glinted faintly. He bent down and picked up a spent rifle casing, old brass stamped 7.62 NATO. His stomach tightened. Whoever had been here wasn't a hunter. Then he saw the paper, folded tight, wedged into the door frame. He pulled it free, the edges damp from melting frost. The message was printed, not handwritten, each letter blocky and cold. "Don't go back to Blackstone, or the ice will break under you." Ethan's fingers clenched around the note until it tore. Someone knew. Not just about Blackstone, but about him. A crunch sounded from behind. He spun, raising the revolver. A flashlight beam hit his face. "Easy there, Ward," a voice called. The light dropped, revealing a tall man in a heavy parka, badge gleaming on the chest. Deputy Cole Rayner, a new face in Bear Ridge. He was in his mid-30s, clean-shaven but with tired eyes, the kind of man who'd seen too much too young. His breath fogged as he spoke. "Heard barking. Thought you might have had a bear." Ethan kept his weapon low but ready. "Not a bear. Somebody's been here." He handed the deputy the shell casing. Rayner turned it between his gloved fingers, frowning. "That's not local issue. Military round. You sure it wasn't left over from hunters?" Ethan's tone was flat. "Hunters don't leave warnings on doors." Rayner raised an eyebrow. "Warnings?" Ethan handed him the torn note. The deputy read it, jaw tightening. "You make anyone angry lately?" Ethan gave a humorless chuckle. "I seem to have that talent." The deputy looked uneasy, scanning the dark tree line. "Could be a prank, but I'll file a report. You keep that gun close. Some folks don't like old secrets waking up." He nodded at Rex. "Dog like that'll know trouble before you do." Ethan watched as Rayner walked back toward his patrol truck, the headlights flaring briefly before vanishing down the slope. He didn't trust easily, but something about the deputy's voice carried genuine concern, mixed with something else, something he couldn't name. Inside, the fire had burned low. Ethan added a log, the sparks jumping like tiny warnings. He sat beside Rex, resting a hand on the dog's back. "They're watching us, boy," he murmured. Rex leaned closer, eyes reflecting the flame. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of being hunted instead of the hunter. Before sleeping, he checked the windows twice, locked the door, and loaded the revolver. But even as he lay in the dark, the image of the boot prints outside the cabin burned behind his eyelids. Whoever had left that message had been close. Close enough to see him, close enough to know his name. And if they wanted him gone, it meant one thing only. He was getting close to the truth. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the footprints, the shell casing, and every trace of the shadow that had walked those woods. But Ethan knew better. Snow didn't erase. It only hid what waited beneath. The dawn came pale and brittle, sunlight catching in the frost like splinters of glass. Ethan Ward drove back toward Blackstone Gorge, his breath fogging the inside of the windshield. The world was quiet. Too quiet. Even Rex, usually eager for the cold air, sat upright in the passenger seat, tail still, eyes fixed on the tree line as if expecting something to move. By the time they reached the glacier mouth, the sun had barely lifted over the ridge. The snow crunched under Ethan's boots as he unloaded the cutting tools, the metallic echo of each sound swallowed by the ice walls towering around them. The note left on his door still burned in his pocket, but he pushed the thought away. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. Rex went first, nose pressed to the ground, following a scent carried by the frozen wind. The dog's fur bristled, and his breath steamed in steady bursts. Ethan followed, marking his steps carefully across the uneven surface, until he reached the same spot where the truck's front end had been uncovered days earlier. Overnight frost had reclaimed some of it, sealing the edges with a thin new crust, but he could still see the olive paint glinting beneath. He fired up the torch again, sparks dancing in the blue morning light. The smell of scorched metal mixed with the sterile chill of the glacier. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hiss of flame and the rhythmic drip of melting ice. When the last plate of ice cracked and fell away, the full length of the vehicle came into view. The rear half crushed against the frozen wall as if something massive had slammed into it decades ago. Ethan wiped his gloves across a panel and saw a faint stenciled code. MX-12 Vault. The word vault sent a shiver down his spine. He pried open the tailgate, coughing as a rush of stale air escaped, a smell of rust, oil, and something older, almost organic. Inside, under layers of brittle tarp, was a metal safe bolted to the truck frame. The lock mechanism was heavy, military grade, the kind used for classified transport. It took him nearly an hour with the plasma cutter to melt through the hinges. When the lid finally gave way, it did so with a hiss, a small puff of ancient air rising like a ghost. Inside were papers sealed in waterproof plastic, a small notebook bound in cracked leather, and a broken wristwatch frozen at 11:42. Ethan lifted the notebook carefully. The name Jonathan Pierce was pressed into the inside cover in faded ink. The handwriting inside was neat but desperate, the lines shaky near the end. He flipped through the first few pages. Assignment 82B. Ordered to transport chemical waste. 12 barrels. Coordinates classified. Told it was inert. Samples leaked during transfer. Advised immediate containment. The next entry darkened in tone. Chemical readings off scale. Crew ordered silence. Threats made against my wife and son. Ethan turned to the last page. The writing trailed downward, the ink smeared as if written in haste. Orders from command. Dump all barrels into Glacial Trench. I refused. They're sending men to intercept. If someone finds this, tell the truth. They can't bury what's already bleeding through the ice. The date below it was December 11th, 1982, the day the truck disappeared. Ethan closed the notebook slowly, his heart hammering. The realization settled cold in his gut. Pierce hadn't died by accident. He'd been running with proof of what Petrocorp had done. Rex barked suddenly, pulling Ethan out of thought. The dog stood at the edge of the ice corridor, ears pinned, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Ethan reached for his revolver and followed Rex's gaze toward the ridge. A shape moved briefly between the trees, too distant to identify, but tall, human, and still. Then it was gone. Only the echo of falling snow remained. He packed the notebook and files into his satchel, securing the vault with the tarp again, His breath came short and fast now. Whoever had left that warning knew this was what he'd find. He snapped a few quick photos of the vault and the serial number, then turned toward the truck. The sky was clouding fast, the light fading, the air colder than before. As they climbed out of the gorge, Rex stopped again, staring back. The dog's ears flattened. A soft whine escaped him. Ethan glanced behind and saw it. On the side of the glacier, fresh footprints. Deep, heavy, recent. Someone else had been there. Maybe still was. When they reached the truck, Ethan slammed the door shut and started the engine, the tires spinning before gripping the frozen earth. He drove hard through the twisting road, eyes flicking to the rear-view mirror every few seconds. Behind them, the gorge vanished into white fog. But the feeling of being watched did not. On the passenger seat, the notebook lay open, a single phrase underlined twice in Pierce's handwriting. If the ice melts, everything returns. The road from Blackstone cut through the mountains like a scar, slick with frost and silence. Ethan Ward gripped the wheel tight, eyes scanning the pale horizon where clouds moved low and heavy. The notebook of Jonathan Pierce sat on the seat beside him, its leather cover worn, its words still echoing in his head. Rex sat upright in the passenger side, chest tense, nose pressed to the cold glass. Something in the dog's body language shifted, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Then Ethan heard it too, a faint mechanical whirring just above the hum of the engine. He looked up through the windshield and saw a dark shape circling against the gray sky. A drone, large, military-grade, matte black with a flashing red sensor beneath its frame. It glided with predatory precision, scanning, searching. "That's no toy," Ethan muttered. The drone dipped low, a metallic glint catching sunlight before it climbed again and vanished into the clouds. The forest fell silent except for the distant echo of its rotors. Rex barked once, sharp and warning, and Ethan's jaw tightened. Someone was watching. He pulled the truck to the side of the trail, stepped out into the brittle cold, and knelt near the rear bumper. Beneath it, half hidden by mud, was a small black disk no larger than a coin. It pulsed with a faint blue light. Tracking signal. Ethan pried it off with his knife and crushed it under his boot until the metal cracked. Rex watched, growling softly. "They tagged us, boy," Ethan said quietly, tossing the broken pieces into the snowmelt. Back inside the truck, he connected his laptop to the radio modem Grace Holloway had given him long ago. The connection flickered weakly across the mountain ridges. He tried sending the scanned pages from Pierce's journal, the coordinates, the confessions. The screen froze halfway through the upload, and static filled the cab. Then, through the noise, Grace's voice broke through, strained, distorted. "Ethan, are you there? You have to listen. Petrocorp doesn't exist anymore." Her tone cracked. "They changed names 20 years ago. They're Orion Energy now. Same board, same people. They're not cleaning the ice, Ethan. They're drilling into it, testing whatever's still buried down there." The signal sputtered, then died completely, replaced by a high-pitched hum. Ethan hit the dashboard. "Grace, come on." Nothing. Just the wind outside and Rex whining low, uneasy. He restarted the truck and drove hard toward Bear Ridge, heart pounding. The snow was coming down in thick curtains now, and daylight was fading into a dull amber haze. As the road curved toward his property, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Tire tracks, fresh ones, cutting across the untouched snow toward his cabin. His pulse quickened. He parked the truck behind the wood line and approached on foot, revolver drawn. The air was still, heavy with that metallic smell he'd learned to associate with danger. The tracks led up to his porch, looped once, and turned back toward the road. Whoever had come hadn't stayed long. Near the steps, a faint shimmer caught his eye. He crouched down and picked it up. A black SUV key fob. Polished, corporate, expensive. Rex sniffed it and let out a low growl. "They were here," Ethan muttered, "and they wanted me to know." He stepped inside cautiously. The door creaked open to the familiar warmth of the stove, the smell of pine smoke, and something faintly off. Paper. His table was as he'd left it, except for one thing. The satellite map of Blackstone Gorge was gone. Stolen. The rest of the documents had been disturbed, but only that single sheet taken. He stood in silence for a long moment, listening. The cabin groaned under the wind. Somewhere far above, faint but unmistakable, came the low hum of the drone again, circling, watching. Ethan moved to the window, staring out into the snow-choked forest. The trees swayed like dark sentinels, the night falling heavy and close. He pressed his hand to the glass, his reflection blurred by frost and firelight. Behind him, Rex sat near the door, muscles tight, eyes locked on the window as if sensing the unseen eyes above. "They're not done with us," Ethan said quietly, "but neither are we." He reached for Pierce's notebook, flipping to the last underlined sentence. "If the ice melts, everything returns." His thumb brushed the ink, the words vibrating with new meaning. He looked out into the dark once more. "Then let it melt," he whispered. The wind howled in answer, shaking the cabin walls. Outside, somewhere beyond the ridge, an engine roared to life, distant but deliberate. Ethan doused the lights, stood by the window, and waited until the sound faded into the night. The game had changed. It wasn't about old crimes anymore. It was about whoever still profited from keeping them buried. 2 days of heavy snow buried the valley in white silence. Ethan Ward stayed close to the cabin, his truck parked under a tarp, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Rex rested near the stove, half asleep but twitching at every sound. The phone sat on the table beside Jonathan Pierce's journal. Grace Holloway had promised help. He just hadn't expected it to come so fast. Early that morning, the rumble of engines shattered the quiet. Ethan stepped outside to see 2 black Suburbans pulling up the frozen path. The lead vehicle bore a faded government seal on its door, EPA Special Division. 4 figures climbed out, their breath pluming in the cold. The man at the front was tall and broad-shouldered, mid-40s, clean-shaven with gray at his temples. His parka bore the patch of the Environmental Crimes Task Force. "Ethan Ward?" he called. His voice carried authority shaped by years of bureaucracy and field work. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Danner, EPA Federal Enforcement. Ms. Holloway sent us." Danner had the kind of face built for skepticism. Sharp eyes, a jaw too square to smile easily. "We're here to verify your claim. Radiation and chemical readings this high, we move fast." Behind him, 2 technicians unloaded gear. Sensors, portable drilling rigs, thermal cameras. One of them, a woman with olive skin and dark curls tucked under a gray beanie, gave a nod to Ethan as she passed. "Dr. Lila Torres," Danner introduced. "Environmental toxicologist, works miracles with bad soil." She grinned faintly. "Usually I test rivers, not glaciers, but I guess first times are special." Ethan motioned for them to follow. "The site's 6 miles north, through the gorge. You'll need ice cleats past the ridge." Danner glanced at Rex. "He part of the team?" "He's the one who found it," Ethan replied. The agent's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Then he's our lead tracker." They reached the glacier by noon. The wind had softened, but the air felt heavier than before, as if the mountain was holding its breath. Ethan guided them down the same slope he had climbed so many times before. The truck still sat buried in ice, now half exposed from earlier cuts. Danner's team got to work quickly, setting sensors, calibrating meters, positioning cameras. Dr. Torres crouched near the fissure, her breath fogging the lens of her mask as she extended a probe into the crevasse. "Gamma readings spiking," she murmured. 300 times baseline. That's not industrial waste. That's synthetic radiotoxin. Someone engineered this. Danner's jaw tightened. "Get samples." The drill whirred to life, cutting through the ice. Murky liquid seeped upward, black-green, the smell acidic and metallic. Torres filled a vial, sealing it with gloved precision. She looked up at Ethan. "If this melts in spring runoff, every stream in this valley gets poisoned. Crops, livestock, people, gone in a season." Ethan said, "Nothing." He just looked at the distant mountains, snow shifting like breath across their ridges. Danner turned to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Confirm full containment order for the Blackstone perimeter. We're declaring a Level 1 contamination event." The order came through seconds later. Red flags were driven into the snow around the perimeter. The quiet gorge filled with the mechanical hum of drones and instruments, all recording, measuring, cataloging. Rex barked once, uneasy with the noise. Torres gave him a gentle pat. "You did good, soldier," she whispered. By late afternoon, the team had collected everything they could. Soil cores, fluid samples, the last fragments of the Petrocorp barrels still visible through the ice. Danner walked back toward Ethan, face hard with resolve. "You were right, Ward. Pierce wasn't running from nothing. This was a cover-up, one buried under 40 years of snow." He paused. "I'll need you to give a statement for federal records. Once this goes public, it won't just be the EPA involved. We're talking Homeland, Justice, maybe even Defense. Orion Energy's got friends in every corner of Washington." Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath curling into the cold air. "I didn't do this for headlines," he said. "I did it because someone tried to silence a man for telling the truth." Danner nodded. "Then you've just given him his voice back." As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the agents packed their gear. The red tape fluttered weakly in the wind, marking the glacier like a wound under treatment. Danner climbed into his vehicle, pausing at the window. "We'll handle the cleanup, but you should be careful who you trust. Orion won't go down quietly." Ethan gave a small nod. "Neither will I." The vehicles pulled away, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Ethan stood with Rex at the edge of the gorge, watching until the last echo of engines faded. The wind rose again, carrying the faint metallic scent of the glacier below, a reminder of what still slept there. He knelt, resting a hand on Rex's neck. "We did it, boy," he said softly, "but the storm's just beginning." A month later, the snow had begun to recede from the streets of Helena, but the air around the federal courthouse carried the same chill that had haunted Ethan Ward since the day he stepped into Blackstone Gorge. Reporters crowded the marble steps, their cameras gleaming under the pale light. Headlines had already named it the Glacier Scandal, and for once, the noise of public outrage was louder than corporate silence. Inside, the courtroom was a cathedral of polished oak and fluorescent truth. Flags hung motionless behind the judge's bench, and microphones lined the long table where witnesses sat. Ethan stood in his plain gray suit, shoulders squared, his dog Rex sitting quietly at his feet. Calm, steady, a creature who had seen more than most men in that room. Across the aisle, the Orion Energy delegation arrived, led by attorney Clifford Hales, a man in his early 50s with slicked-back silver hair, a navy suit so precise it reflected the lights like armor. His face was smooth but empty, the kind of expression learned by men who made a career out of denial. He walked with a faint limp, an old sports injury rumor said, and a reputation for dismantling witnesses with surgical calm. "Mr. Ward," he said in greeting, voice silk over steel, "I hope you realize how much trouble your enthusiasm has caused." Ethan said nothing. He simply looked at the man with eyes carved from the same patience that years of service had taught him. Grace Holloway was already at the witness table, her gray hair tied neatly, eyes sharp behind her glasses. Months of tension had stripped away her fatigue. She looked like the journalist she once was, fearless, defiant, alive. The judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Maris, entered. A woman in her 60s with short white hair, skin like old parchment, and a gaze that silenced the room without a word. "This hearing will determine whether the Environmental Crimes Division may pursue criminal charges against Orion Energy," she announced. "We begin with witness testimony." Grace was first. She spoke for 40 minutes, methodical, precise, unflinching. She presented photos of Petrocorp's old documents, the corporate name changes, and the missing reports from 1982. When Hales tried to interrupt, she cut him short with a tone that could slice glass. "You can rename a company, Mr. Hales, but you can't rename its sins." Her statement drew a faint murmur from the press gallery. Then came Ethan. He rose, adjusting his tie awkwardly, feeling more at ease in snow boots than courtroom shoes. He took the oath, placed Pierce's journal on the table beside him, and began. His voice carried a quiet conviction, describing everything: the frozen truck, the chemical vault, the threats, the drone. Images filled the screen behind him: the corroded barrels, the radiation readings, the face of a man who had died trying to do right. The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Rex stayed. At his feet, ears twitching, steady as stone. When Hales rose to cross-examine, his tone was smooth, rehearsed. "Mr. Ward, are you aware that the events you describe took place over 40 years ago? The statute of limitations on industrial negligence?" Ethan interrupted, voice low but firm. "Negligence ends when the damage does, Mr. Hales, and the damage is still bleeding through the ice." A stir ran through the room. Hales tried again. "Surely you understand that this was a wartime operation. The country was different then. Fear, secrecy, mistakes were made." Ethan looked at him directly. "A mistake doesn't get buried with 12 barrels of poison and a man who tried to stop it." He turned slightly toward the panel of senators, his words steady, deliberate. "A mistake doesn't stalk your home with drones. It doesn't send you threats for digging too deep. This wasn't an accident. It was preservation. Of profit, not people." The silence that followed was deep and heavy. Judge Maris's pen stopped mid-note. On the projection screen, the image of the glacier shimmered under the courtroom lights. Ethan looked up at it and spoke the words that would echo far beyond that room. "A tragedy can freeze for decades, but a lie doesn't die. It just waits for the thaw. You can't bury a crime in ice. It only waits for the sun." Grace blinked back tears. Rex lifted his head as if sensing the weight of it. Hales sat down, his composure cracked for the first time. The judge finally spoke. "This court finds sufficient cause to recommend a federal indictment for environmental crimes, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence will proceed to trial." When Ethan stepped outside into the cold, the crowd erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, snow melting on warm lights. But for him, the noise was distant. He looked down at Rex, who stood poised beside him, tail wagging once. "We did it, boy," Ethan whispered. "Now the rest is up to them." That night, every major network replayed the footage. The man, the dog, the glacier, the words. The phrase, "You can't bury a crime in ice," burned across headlines. It became a rallying cry, painted on protest signs, spoken in classrooms. For once, truth had thawed, and the world was listening. Summer arrived late in Montana that year, as if the mountains themselves were reluctant to surrender their snow. When the thaw finally came, it did not whisper. It roared. The Blackstone River, once locked beneath sheets of ice, surged free in a current of pure blue, carrying away decades of frozen silence. The valley bloomed again. Pines shed their frost, meadows turned gold, and the air carried the smell of water and new beginnings. Ethan Ward stood on the porch of his cabin, the same cabin that had once felt like a refuge from the world. Now it felt like part of the world again. The past winter had carved something into him that no metal ever could. A quiet understanding that truth, like spring, always finds its way back. The case against Orion Energy had shaken the country. After months of hearings and endless denials, the verdict came down like thunder. The corporation was found guilty of environmental negligence, conspiracy, and obstruction. $80 million were ordered into a restoration fund for the mountain towns poisoned by their greed. Names were named. Careers ended. But to Ethan, justice wasn't measured in fines. It was in what the river had become again. He'd refused every interview, every award. The EPA had offered him a permanent position, but he only agreed to one thing: becoming a field advisor for their mountain region. A quiet job, part solitude, part purpose. He worked alone, checking runoff levels, teaching younger agents how to listen to the land. "The mountain talks," he would tell them. "You just have to know the language." Rex was never far from his side. The German shepherd, now 7 years old, had grown heavier in the chest, but no less quick on his paws. His black and gold coat gleamed under the summer light, and the small scar on his muzzle, his badge of survival, made him look like a soldier who'd earned every stripe. When the EPA presented Ethan with a plaque for bravery, they also pinned a small silver medallion on Rex's collar, a circle engraved with the words, "Dog of Justice." Cameras had captured that moment, the veteran kneeling beside his dog, hand on the loyal creature's neck, and the image had spread across the nation. Children drew it in classrooms, newspapers printed it beside headlines about environmental reform. Rex had become a symbol of truth that could not be silenced. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, the world turned gold and quiet. Ethan walked down the narrow path to the riverbank, Rex running ahead through the tall grass. The water reflected the sky in a wash of copper and flame. He could still see the distant outline of Blackstone Gorge to the north, now cordoned off by federal tape and guarded research towers. The place where he had found the buried truck no longer frightened him. It felt at peace. He crouched by the edge of the water, dipping his fingers into the current. It was cold, clean, alive again. For a moment he thought of Jonathan Pierce, the man who had died for his conscience, who had trusted the ice to protect the truth until someone brave enough could find it. "You made it," Ethan whispered. "They can't hide you anymore." Rex splashed nearby, chasing reflections, the sun turning his fur to burnished gold. A voice called from behind. It was Lila Torres, the toxicologist who had once measured poison from that same glacier. She was visiting the site for a follow-up study. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, her field jacket rolled at the sleeves, her expression calm and kind. "Water samples came back clean," she said, smiling. "Blackstone's officially safe." Ethan returned her smile, faint but sincere. "Good to hear. Maybe the mountain's forgiving us." Lila shook her head. "The mountain doesn't forgive. It just forgets, if we let it heal." She stayed for a while, talking about how new trout were being sighted upstream, how wildflowers had returned to the banks. When she left, Ethan watched her truck disappear along the road, then turned back to the river. Rex barked happily, dashing through the shallows, his paws breaking the mirrored surface. Ethan leaned on the old fence post, arms crossed, the last light of day warming his face. He thought of Grace, now back in her small cabin, her old typewriter working again. He thought of Danner, still fighting battles in courts he'd never see. And he thought of Pierce, whose voice would live on through every regulation, every warning label, every lesson carved from this tragedy. As twilight deepened, the river glowed like molten glass. Rex ran along the bank, barking at the reflection of the clouds, the water shimmering beneath his paws. Ethan watched, a soft smile crossing his weathered face. Beneath all that ice, he murmured, the truth was just waiting for the sun. The wind shifted through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and thawed earth. Rex stopped at the edge of the river, gazing across the open water where the last fragments of ice floated downstream, glistening like old ghosts set free. Ethan stood quietly behind him, eyes on the horizon where light met water. Banco de gumoitu trongim lang, he whispered to himself, the words slipping out like a prayer. Nhang hong da chon vuisu that mai mai. And as the sky flared one last time before dusk, Rex turned toward him, tail wagging, and the world, after so many years of silence, finally felt whole again. At the end, Ethan realized it wasn't luck that led him there. It was grace. Because even when truth is buried in ice, God's light can still find a way through. The frozen river, the loyal dog, the courage to stand for what's right, all were small miracles woven by his hand. We all carry our own winters, frozen dreams, silent hurts. But with faith, patience, and love, the ice will melt. God's mercy always flows like the river when spring returns. If this story touched your heart, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of faith and hope. May God bless and guide you through every storm toward your thaw.